Yo, what's going on guys, SpaceKong here. So in this video I'm going to be showing you a revamp of the Dualcaster build. And when I say revamp, I mean for the Morrowind update. So let me show you my fully buffed stats. So we're at 41k Magicka, nearly 18k maximum health, and 10k stamina. Spell damage is at 2.6k, and the spell crit is at a 57.2% chance, which is pretty awesome. Spell resistance 20k, physical resistance almost 19k. This build is great for maintaining high damage output, and is great for resource management sustainability. You're probably thinking, how, considering I have virtually no recovery? Well, I will get to that part in the skills. This build is also great for solo content such as Veteran Maelstrom Arena, Skyreach Catacombs, and soloing vet dungeons. So I got 64 points into Magicka, because the more Magicka you have, the more resource you have, and the more damage you output. I have 2 Mundus stones, the Shadow and the Thief, to increase my crit chance and increase my crit damage. And this build revolves around a lot of AoEs and damage over time, so you're going to be critting quite a lot and outputting a lot of damage. For the food, I'm using max health and max Magicka. So let's have a look at the gear I'm wearing. It's exactly the same as it was previously. So using a 3-piece willpower with the spell damage enchantment on each of them. It's all arcane and it gives us max Magicka and max spell damage. Now you could switch this out for Moon Dancer or Infallible Aether. Both sets work really well, and well, especially trial sets because they are considered best in slot for the 3-piece. But if you're looking for a cheap build which is still effective, then definitely go with willpower. So for the 5-piece I'm using a twice spawned star in light, which gives you, for the enchantment, maximum Magicka, and it's in divines. It's all in divines, but if you want to go best in slot, then for the big piece use infused. So what twice spawned star gives you is maximum health, maximum stamina, maximum Magicka, and it allows you to have 2 Mundus stones at a time. Now you're probably wondering, why do I need the health and the stamina? Well, the health is obviously so you're at 18k health, so you don't get one-shotted. The stamina works very well with one of the skills, which you'll be using Dark Conversion to get Magicka back, which works out that the stamina you use actually works out that it gives you more Magicka back. And as explained earlier, for the 2 Mundus stones, you want the 2 that give you the higher crit chance and the higher crit damage. Because we're using a lot of dots and AoEs, you're going to be hitting an insane amount of crits. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 2 ways of going about this. If you want more crit damage, then go with divines. But if you want to have more max Magicka, which means more damage overall for single target, then you should probably go with infused for the large pieces. But this build really does excel at destroying mobs and bosses. As for the monster set, I'm using Alambris, so I'm using 1 medium and 1 heavy, with the maximum Magicka enchant. Although it's reinforced, it's not the best. It would probably be better if it was divines. But the reason I'm using 1 medium and 1 heavy is so I get the 3-part passive for the Undaunted skill. So we've got a maximum Magicka enchant. It's reinforced, which isn't best in slot. Divines would be the best, but RNG is not in my favour this time. Even though it took like hundreds of tries, yeah, I just can't get divines. I don't know why. The game hates me. So, it gives you, for 1 piece, maximum Magicka, and for 2 piece, when you deal flame or shock damage, you have a 10% chance to summon a meteor shower of that damage type that deals 1,429 damage to all enemies within 4 meters every 1 second for 5 seconds, and each effect can occur once every 8 seconds. So, we're using lightning attacks, being the fact that we're a sorcerer, because we have a whole lightning skill line, so that's going to proc one of them. And then we're using a flame staff also, which is going to be proccing the other one. So, because we're a dot build and AoEs, we're going to be proccing this pretty much all the time, with almost no delay between cooldowns, which of course is going to give us the highest output of damage. For the sake of this helmet, I use the hide helmet option because it makes me look like some Power Ranger or something. Not a very cool look in the Elder Scrolls. So I'm using a Maelstrom Lightning Staff. It's infused, which gives us a better enchant. And for the enchantment, targets affected by Wall of Elements take 1,514 additional damage from your light and heavy attacks, and because we're going to be using lots of dots and AoEs, it's going to be active pretty much all the time, and it also gives you 213 spell damage, which is why in my opinion I prefer this to having sharpened or precise. It used to be on the back bar that I would use dual wield, but for the sake of this update it's better that I use dual destros. Although Maelstrom staffs are very hard to farm if you're not very familiar with the Maelstrom Arena, or if you're just a new player, so you could use any old staff which would work because it's only a one set piece. For the front bar I'm using a Maelstrom Inferno staff, which is precise. But I understand how a lot of people won't be able to get these staffs. It's taken me months and months to farm just these two staffs. Alternatively, you could use the master weapons, or you could just use a no set piece weapon. Making it extremely hard to die. Plus it's also a very cheap skill, so between that and the Dark Conversion you can pretty much gain resources whilst in combat. For the next skill we have Crushing Shock. Now you could use the other morph if you want to output even more damage, but I use this because it puts the opponent off balance and interrupts them, which is great for Maelstrom Arena. This move is your spammable once all your AoEs are down. Even with this morph you still output a lot of damage, but it's just very handy to have a range interrupt. Next up we have Blockade of Fire. Now this is one of your AoEs. So essentially what it says is it slams your staff down and does 1.8k flame damage to enemies every 1 second for 8 seconds. Burning enemies take 20% more damage from this ability, and whilst this ability is down, your Maelstrom staff will also do more damage for your light and heavy attacks. Next up we have Crystal Frags. Now this is not a spammable. What it does is every time you cast a magic ability you have a 35% chance of causing your next crystal fragments to be an instant cast and deal 10% more damage. It also costs half, so that's when you want to be using it, once it's procced. We're using Inner Light just to give us more max Magicka and also the Minor Prophecy at all times. As for the ultimate, we're going to be using Eye of the Flame. Now, we don't have to use this ultimate. If you're going to be doing single target, it's probably better to use Meteor. But if you're using this against mobs, then it's perfect. Especially in Skyrich Catacombs with your Fighter's Guild passive, so you get ultimate cast back to back. Crit Surge. Now the reason why I'm using this one is because it gives us increased healing. You can use Power Surge, which will give you the Major Sorcery, but because I'm using potions which are already giving Major Sorcery, then I might as well just go for the extra healing. But if you're using just your normal trash potions, then definitely go with Power Surge. Next up we have Boundless Storm. Now this one is to give you your physical and spell resistance, and it also does extra shock damage to enemies, so if you're up close using your dot damage and your AoEs, this is also another AoE. And although the damage it does isn't that high, it's damage nonetheless, almost 1k extra damage per second, and it gives you your physical and spell resistance, so it's a win-win. You might as well have this. Liquid Lightning. Now this is another AoE attack. You're going to be stacking all your AoEs and damage over time effects. And in turn, what it's going to do is proc your Lambrus, both the fire and the shock one. The fire one is going to be on the Wall of Elements, and the shock is going to be on this and the Bound Storm. We're also using Inner Light again because we have to double slot it. Dark Conversion. Now this is where you can heal yourself and get extra Magicka for converting 2,000 stamina, which is amazing and very cheap. Essentially, you have an extra 25k Magicka just from using your stamina up. Next up, we have Overload. Now this is when you want to go for single target boss melting, or just to switch over to another bar. For this you're going to be using light attacks, don't use heavy attacks because it's just a waste. But the main reason why I have this ultimate ability is for the third skill bar. And if you didn't already know this, yes, it gives you a third skill bar which you can change, but you can only change it whilst you have Overload active. So using Hardened Ward, just to stay alive. Inner Light give you your max Magicka still, and also gives you Major Prophecy. Crit Surge, you're going to have to keep this up at all times to give you more healing. We're using Crystal Fragments because every time you proc your shield, it's going to give you a 35% chance to have an instant cast of this for half the cost. Dark Conversion, when you have your shields up, then you're definitely going to be making Magicka instead of losing it. And as for the light and heavy attacks themselves, they also restore Magicka. So you can use this with the Dark Conversion and the Hardened Ward whilst doing damage and still gaining resources. As for the champion points, so using 55 Tenacity, 55 Mooncalf, and 100 in Arcanist. Now the Tenacity does work really well because the light and heavy attacks also give you sustain, and the fact that you're going to be using your light and heavy attacks to proc your Maelstrom Staff means you're going to be getting a lot of resources. Now the diminishing returns are very harsh, and I did put 100 into Arcanist. You don't have to, but I wanted the maximum amount of Magicka recovery that I can get because you don't get much, especially in this update. So some people might say it's a waste to put it in there, because once you get past 75, then the last 25 points are just for 1%. But personally, I think it's worth it for that only. If you're a stamina build, then you would have done one for Mooncalf. Okay, so 11 into Blessed, 100 into Elfborn, and 43 into Elemental Expert. Now the reason why we have 100 into Elfborn is for the maximum amount of damage for your healing and critical strikes. Because you got the 2 Mundus stones, which are based on critical damage, you might as well have 100 points into this as opposed to putting in 50 or 60, because yeah, the diminishing returns are very harsh, but at the same time you want to hit the maximum amount of damage output, especially being that you're going to hit a crit every 57%. So for the Elemental Expert, increase your Flame, Frost and Shock damage down by 10%, and Magicka damage. We have 56 into Thaumaturge, which increases your damage over time effects, because you're going to be using the burning status also. It's definitely worth putting some points into this, even if it's not up to 20%, you can at least put it up to 10, because it is definitely worth doing. So for the warrior, we're using 56 into Ironclad, 48 into Spell Shield, but there are a lot of passives that we need from the warrior skill line, so we're going to have to be spreading these points out pretty thin and evenly. So yeah, 56 into Ironclad, then 48 into Spell Shield. We don't need any crit resistance because we're not doing PvP. Okay, so we put 50 into Light Armor Focus because we're wearing light armor obviously, so that gives us our physical resistance, and then the Spell Shield gives us our spell resistance. There's no point in putting any more than what's already in there, because then you'll be losing out of it. Bastion. Now this one is very important because you're going to be using your damage shield a lot with the Hardened Ward. So I highly recommend going up to 20% on this, so you'll be using 56 champion points. You can go lower, but the only problem is you'll be needing to use your damage shield more often. So this is the most effective way for your resource management. Because in between Hardened Wards, when you want to get your resource back, you'll be using Dark Conversion. So you're going to want the shield to last as long and have as much damage absorb as possible. Okay, now to give you a demonstration of the build. I won't be doing a DPS test in this, I'm just going to show you the rotation and why it's good to have the 2 Mundus stones. As you can see, we're hitting 1,310 on a crit chance and only 686 on a non-crit chance. And that's just from using the lightning form, which is the weakest of all your attacks. So imagine how good it's going to be when you put all these attacks together. So as you can see, I put down all of our dots, including the liquid lightning, blockade of fire, and using the lightning form, and that in turn will proc both the Alambris, which gives you even more damage, and on top of that you can use the crystal frag procs, which I wasn't really using much at all because I wanted to show you the normal rotation. And because it's a very cheap rotation, the crystal frag procs are going to be proccing very often. As you can see, the Dark Conversion almost gives us a full bar of Magicka. So when you're running out of resources, like I'm doing right now, just pissing away on my Magicka, what you do is switch between your Dark Conversion and your Hardened Ward. And the fact that the Hardened Ward only costs about 3k Magicka, and the Dark Conversion gives you 5k Magicka. And the Hardened Ward lasts about 6 seconds, so even though you're in combat and you have a massive damage shield, you're still going to be making resource. And the reason why I put them both on separate bars is because you can animation cancel, so as soon as you cast, then switch your weapon, which in turn makes it extremely quick. And then rebuff, and on you go. But there is a way to gain resource whilst also doing damage. It's not as good as doing the Dark Conversion way, but you can still gain resource whilst doing damage, and I'll show you that now. So I've emptied my resource, and then I switched to my overload bar. And with this you can use Hardened Ward, and your light and heavy attacks will also restore Magicka. So between that you can use Hardened Ward, use your light and heavy attacks, and Dark Conversion at the same time, so you're still doing damage. It's not going to be a lot of damage, but it's going to be free damage because ultimate doesn't cost any of your resources except for your ultimate, which in itself is extremely cheap. But the only way I'd ever use that is if I run out of resource completely with the Magicka and stamina. However, you can still do all of this damage without using your overload bar. So what I'll do is put down all your dots and then Hardened Ward, and then just put one of the Dark Conversions in between. Granted, your DPS will go down, but you're going to have a near infinite sustain. But failing that, you can always resort to light and heavy attacks. And that is a fully updated dual caster build. I will be updating more of my builds very soon, but I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and found it useful. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you'd like to see more videos like this in the future, please leave a like and subscribe, and as always guys, have yourselves a great day. Peace!